Penn Station, New York City, the heart of almost every Amtrak, subway, and commuter train in the Big Apple. Its reach not only spans east to west, but south all the way to our home rails in the Sunshine State, being the terminus and origination point for both the Silver Star and the Silver Meteor services. Hello everyone, welcome to the Empire State, a land rich in history, commerce, business, tourism, and railroading. This summer we've taken a trip up north here with my whole family to explore the skyscrapers of Manhattan all the way to the infamous Catskill Mountains, the home of legend Rip Van Winkle. But first, the big city and all the bustling streets. There'd be a couple spots I wanted to hit in NYC, first being Penn Station. Like stated earlier, this is the origination point for dozens of Amtraks ranging from high-speed Acellas to the familiar trains 91 and 97. It's the terminus for northbounds 92 and 98 as well, led by Amtrak's electric Siemens locomotives, the ACS 64s, replacing the normal P42s in Washington, D.C. While not one of the Florida trains, we were treated by the departure of an eastbound Northeast Corridor regional, today led by engine 611. We're set up at one of the many junctions here at Penn Station, with Amtrak and the Long Island Railroad connecting here to create a madness of a dozen tracks or so, crossovers and switches. We'd see about 8 trains here in our 20 minutes on the platform. Later we'd visit probably the grandest station in all of the U.S., Grand Central Station. Opened in 1913 for the New York Central Railroad, Grand Central has been the hub of passenger traffic in the Empire State for over a century. The station averages 67 million passengers a year, and that number is growing every day, along with the unbearable traffic that haunts the city. Back in the 40s and 50s, the station would serve a handful of railroads from the New York Central to the Long Island, and dozens of subways that serve the entirety of the city still today. Restored in the early 2010s by MTA, Grand Central still boasts the pride of the city in its marble walls and golden chandeliers, saluting to a hopeful future for the station. Final stop would be the Hellgate Bridge on a gloomy 4th of July morning. Another beautiful construction by the railroad, the bridge stretches over the length of the East River using a 1,700-foot steel through arch span. A 4-year construction of the bridge would bring its completion date to 1916, when at the time, the bridge carried 4 tracks. Currently, the Hellgate serves Amtrak and CSX, with 2 tracks for the Northeast Corridor and 1 for freight. We'll see why CSX uses this line later in the video. With the drizzle becoming a solid downpour now, an Acela train would cross northbound, heading to New Haven. A now familiar sight, Amtrak is keeping trains moving on this bridge as a southbound for Penn Station bends around the curve over the small but crucial Randall's Island, with another ACS 64 leading the way. New York City would provide us with plenty of entertainment as we explored the metropolis over the next few days. But as much as I enjoyed the city and everything within, the real treat would come during the second half of the trip in calm, scenic upstate New York. Hunter, New York, about 120 miles north of the quagmire of the Big Apple, is Greene County's mountain town, nestled comfortably in one of the many valleys within the Catskill Mountains. All throughout the area, the town echoes the name of Rip Van Winkle, a North American legend and the brainchild of author Washington Irving. Published in 1819, the story takes place in these very Catskill Mountains, the same infamous range that tonight's golden hour is coating. A walk through the small town and a few photos would be our entertainment tonight, as the next day would be the most eventful day of the trip. The sun would just be over the horizon as we awoke on the morning of July 7th, the same morning that we had set aside for Railfanning, CSX's main artery into the Empire State. So through the hills of the Catskills we'd go, making an early morning drive up to our first spot in Amsterdam, New York. I thought Amsterdam would be a good place to start as we made our way south by east along the line, covering 3 CSX subdivisions. The busiest is this line, named for the river that it follows all the way to Syracuse. CSX's Mohawk sub is a railfanning paradise as the line offers scenic views, Amtrak's, and dozens of freight trains coming north out of the massive Selkirk facilities to the south, with traffic from the west coming from the Great Lakes and Chicago areas. Amsterdam is one of many small industrial towns along this line that were built up around the railroad depot. Still served by a handful of Amtrak's daily, Amsterdam is no more than a small brick building and a parking lot constructed by Amtrak in 1973 to replace the dilapidated New York Central Station in the middle of town. This would be spot number one of many, and a nice place to watch the end of sunrise and the beginning of the new day. About 20 minutes after arriving and setting up, our first train would light up the scanner, calling as M367, a daily manifest from Selkirk just south of Albany to Chicago, working DeWitt Yard and Syracuse along the way. With 4 engines all up front today, M367 would have 113 cars in trail, destined for the Windy City. The railroad is always running tests, whether those be for efficiency or crew amenities, 24/7, 365. A recent one is the advent of crews, like Amtrak's, calling out the report from the defect detectors right after the DED spits out their results. I'm not sure why this is mandatory for crews now, but it's a second chance to hear the train symbol and the lead engine of the approaching or passing train, especially if near to the defect detector.
Milepost 177.4. Track 1. No defects. No defects. Total axle 476. End of transmission.
36 CFSC 931 traffic on the way. No defect, Milepost QC 177 out and clear. That's 179 out.
The all-red indication on track 1 behind M367 would be good news for us, symboling another westbound was lined through and already getting signals. So we'd pack up our stuff and quickly move a few miles east to CP 175. I had a couple locals tell me this was a great spot to camp out, as all westbound signals are clearly visible and you can park on an almost trafficless road. Looking west towards town, we have another high green on track 1. The signal to the left is the track 2 signal, and to the right is the signal for the siding that begins 10,900 feet to the east at CP 173. Most signals and control points around here are named after the milepost to the location, which makes decoding dispatcher and crew jargon a lot easier once you get familiar. Hearing the train calling signals to the east at CP 173, we knew that our westbound would be here in minutes, rounding the bend into view momentarily. With 2 rebuilt AC-44s leading, I-159 would continue his westbound trek to Syracuse and its DeWitt Yard, departing from a port in New Jersey earlier in the morning. Something we don't often see down south are trains made up of completely international containers. These colorful containers are docking on massive cargo ships from different continents worldwide to be loaded onto trains like this I-159 and unloaded in western New York. It was about 8:30 now, and with an 8:56 estimated arrival at the Amsterdam station, Amtrak 280, the eastbound Empire service, was now in the picture. Although there are 2 tracks that reside next to the station, the number 1 main is the only track that can serve the station with paved loading ramps and stools for passengers to climb on and off safely. So with another CSX westbound coming we'd hear the NC dispatcher telling train IO-17 to drag his feet a little bit to allow Amtrak to cross back over to track 2 after serving the station. During all this, we'd move down to a popular photo spot along the Mohawk sub, and it's obvious why. This is Canal Lock 10, one of many on the commercial portion of the Mohawk River. With a quasi-parking lot right off of Highway 5, the river, an old Adirondack factory, and the lock made for some interesting scenery, usually found on model train layouts and dioramas. Looking west down the tracks, we can see the other side of the siding that ends at CP-175. The number 1 track signal here at CP-173 is lit with an approach signal, telling our westbound to prepare to stop at CP-175, where Amtrak 280 is still crossing over to track 2. However, in moments, as 280 clears the junction and the switches reverse back to normal, the signal would go green.
Amtrak 280, approach limit at CP-173, track 2 east. Roger, approach limit at CP-173, track 2 east.
As IO-17 approached from the west, here came Amtrak 280 around the corner with a friendly crew doing every bit of track speed. And not 90 seconds later would be IO-17, revving back up to the 60 mph intermodal speed limit. IO-17 would be another long one, clocking the DD at milepost 177 at 10,500 feet. Surprisingly, unlike most trains of these lengths in the southeast, no distributed power on this guy, and barely any the entire day. As mountainous as the terrain is, it confuses me why it's not used, as this train originates in Worcester, Massachusetts, near Boston, making a beeline straight to Chicago. With the morning rush wrapped up after 4 trains in less than an hour, we'd start making our way east to the next spot. One very appealing aspect of upstate New York is the variety of terrain. One shot can be by the river, another in a big city, and one like this, in the middle of the forests that coat the Catskill Mountains. Here on the outskirts of Schenectady, we're on the Selkirk sub running from CP-175 south to its namesake yard near Albany. A check of the eastbound side of these ABS signals would reveal another high green for another train, exiting the puzzle of tracks that is Rotterdam Junction, also known as CP-169. At the junction, trains can turn south towards us in Albany, or continue straight to Schenectady, including a high-speed Amtrak line that parallels the freight side. In a few minutes, M634 would round the curve on its last leg of its multi-day journey from Columbus, Ohio, to Selkirk. The contest on this guy would be pretty interesting, made up of these high-top black, white, and green gondolas. These are empties returning to New York for another load. At Selkirk, the cut of freight and gondolas are organized to make up a local or shuttle train that takes the consists right into downtown New York City, with the yard being in the Bronx. Every day, the cars are filled up with scrap metal, construction debris, and trash, which are all taken back to Selkirk and added to this train's westbound sister, M635. The ABS signals here wouldn't give us any more hints on traffic, so we'd stop for a quick breakfast as we made our way to our next spot. Here at Burdack Road is the Rotterdam Industrial Park and the spot the railroad calls South Schenectady. Working the yard next to CPSH is LO20, the daily local that switches customers between here at South Schenectady and Amsterdam terminating in Selkirk at the end of the day. He had orders from the dispatcher to momentarily move his entire cut of cars into the yard to clear up track 2 for northbound freight, calling as M627. Led by a standard ES44AH, Dash 8 number 7765 would be in the second position, still sporting a chassis system sticker on the nose, which I believe was installed when the engine was repainted sometime in 2015. I'm not sure how many sticker engines are left on the system, but with CSX's new Heritage Unit program now underway, I doubt we'll see or care about these much longer. With freight from Selkirk and surrounding areas, M627 is on his way to Frontier Yard in Buffalo, working a handful of yards on his way west, including DeWitt Yard in Syracuse and Goodman Yard in Rochester. With the clock closing in on 11 a.m., it was our cue to head over to the Hudson sub for the main event of the day. Nestled comfortably in the trees and hills behind a small neighborhood is Amtrak's high-speed route to Schenectady, where trains pass at 110 miles per hour. As much as this line has been upgraded, however, history still abides at milepost 163. Over 75 years ago, the New York Central Railroad installed this two-way ABS searchlight signal, and here in 2023, they're still in service, seeing over 10 movements a day. With the green now lit for a westbound, Amtrak 63, the Maple Leaf, would come into view, flying towards Amsterdam and ultimately Toronto. My first time filming a train over 100 miles an hour would end a success as we departed south once again into the valleys of the Catskills. Located 4 miles north of Voorheesville and 5 miles south of the Rotterdam Yard are French's Hollow Falls, where the double-track Selkirk sub crosses over the Norman Kill, which flows all the way to Albany, where it drains into the Hudson River. The falls offer an uncommon shot as two bridges carry the main lines high over the water on original steel supports built over 50 years ago. Without any signals nearby and the sound of the water beneath us, our next train would sneak up on us, calling as I-007. I-007 is one of many trains that originate from North Bergen, New Jersey's largest intermodal facility. This small train is bound for Rose Lake, Illinois, on the outskirts of St. Louis. With rain beginning to fall, we'd abandon our post and head to a more suitable spot to wait out the passing showers. 4 miles south of the falls is Voorheesville. With a population of just over 2,800 residents, Voorheesville is by far the most popular railfanning spot along the Selkirk sub. It makes sense, as Voorheesville has been associated with the railroad since its beginning. Named after New York Central Railroad attorney Alonzo Voorhee, the village was established in 1899 as a central junction for the suburbs of Albany. At one point, a second rail line crossed the New York Central here, now turned into one of many rail-to-trail projects that dot the U.S. The double-track CSX line, however, is still a beehive of action, with trains constantly coming and going, calling CP Vo while they go through town. Extensive railfan tourism prompted the town to build a small gazebo next to the tracks, right where the old station would have stood. With donations from CSX, the public school district, and a handful of generous citizens, the gazebo was completed only a handful of years ago and is a great place to watch the trains pass, or in this case, stay out of the rain. Only a quarter mile down from the tracks is CP Vo, where presently a high green is lit on track 2 for northbound out of Selkirk. Hearing the train pass CP Unionville 4 miles to our south, we knew that he'd be here soon. So 8 minutes later, as the clock struck 1300, here was I-169, intermodal from New York City to Chicago's 59th Street headquarters. I-169 goes on duty every morning at CSX's large yard in Port Newark, New Jersey, on the outskirts of New York City, taking a usually long cut of intermodal containers to Chicago, now only 160 miles into its 950-mile trip.
CSX Equipment Defect Detector. Milepost 2.0. Track 2. No defects. No defects. Total axle 136. End of transmission.
10 minutes pass and the signal on track 2 has once again upgraded to a high green for yet another westbound intermodal. It's I-003 departing South Kearny Yard just a couple miles north of where I-169 began. This one, however, is headed for Bedford Park on the west side of Chicago. With the clouds only getting darker, we'd call it a day here, but would be out one last time the very next day. Situated 45 miles south of Albany along the Hudson River is Saugerties. With a small downtown and historic lighthouse on the Hudson, Saugerties is also known as CP102 on CSX's River Subdivision. We'd set up here after a day of exploring town as we knew of two things. A southbound train was on its way, and some original Conrail tri-light signals still guard CP102, the south end of the 4-mile siding that starts at CP106. Similar to the Y-pattern signals still in service in the Bone Valley and Mulberry, the tri-lights have been here for over 3 decades, governing trains from Conrail to CSX. Latest on the list is I-004, more priority intermodal from Chicago, this one going to South Kearny, New Jersey. I-004 would be our final train of the trip, as the next day we'd fly back home to Tampa. I hope y'all enjoyed this video, but don't worry, there's plenty of videos to still come of Central Florida and the trains there. But until we meet again trackside, this is Christian for Multicolor Films, end of transmission.